going to use the same word, but I don't mean it in the exact same sense. Inherently personal. So like we have atheists saying that the first cause could be just this supercomputer, right?
Yeah.
Why is that not possible?
Yeah, so a personal cause is the only explanation of a temporal effect from an eternal, timeless cause. And here's a quote from Reasonable Faith, which is William Lane Craig's website that he runs. He gave this in a speech in 2015. The problem is, if a cause is sufficient to produce its effect, then the cause is there. Then if the cause is there, the effect must be there too. For example, the cause of water's freezing is the temperatures being below 0 degrees Celsius. If the temperature has been below 0 degrees from eternity, then any water around would be frozen from eternity. It would be impossible for the water to begin to freeze just a finite time ago. Now, the cause of the universe is permanently there, since it is timeless. So why isn't the universe permanently there as well? Why did the universe come into being only 14 billion years ago? Why isn't it as permanent as the cause? Al-Ghazali, who originally formulated this argument in the Middle Ages, maintained that the answer to this problem is that the first cause must be a personal being endowed with freedom of the will. His creating the universe is a free act, which is independent of any prior determining conditions. So his act of creating can be something spontaneous and new. Freedom of the will enables one to get an effect with a beginning from a permanent, timeless cause. Thus, we are brought not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator. Another analogy that I've come across is if you have a table sitting there for an eternity, it cannot suddenly become a chair or do anything really. But if you have a man who is sitting in a chair for an eternity, that man may at any point will to stand up. And so it demonstrates the difference between a mechanical or scientific cause and a personal cause. That's another argument, is that I can't remember the guy's name who defends this argument. I can get it to you if you want me to after this Q&A closes. He argued that all causes are either scientific or personal, and since before the universe existed, or sans the universe, time or science did not exist, there were no scientific causes, then the cause must be personal. And then lastly, there are well-defined ontological categories of concrete versus abstract objects and physical versus non-physical objects. So a concrete object is something that can interact with causes and effects. Basically, it has causal power. So a concrete object would be anything physical. It could be, I guess I would say God. Whereas an abstract object would be something like the number 4, or I don't know, a square root symbol or something like that. Well, not a symbol, the concept of a square root. So mathematical things, morals such as goodness, happiness, those are abstract objects. And so the only ontological category that is accepted and well known to be concrete, meaning it has causal abilities, but also be non-physical, is an unembodied mind. If it were abstract, it would not be able to cause anything, and if it were physical, it could not have existed. So an unembodied mind is the only ontological category that is known to be able to exist concretely and non-physically, and be able to cause, or to be able to have caused the universe to begin to exist.
Okay. Real quick, the stream audio literally just started working, so I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. One of the debaters did not show up, so we're doing things a little bit differently. We're currently in the middle of a Q&A. Next question for that is, what do you think of the Kalam being valid with an assumption of the existence of multiple deities?
I'm sorry, so repeat that again?
What do you think of the Kalam being valid with an assumption of the existence of multiple deities? Basically, if you assume polytheism, is the Kalam still valid?
I see, okay. So the Kalam cosmological argument argues definitely for the existence of a supernatural being, and I would argue that it is most plausible for it to argue for the existence of a monotheistic, or argue for a monotheistic religion, for two reasons. I would say the first. Hold on a second.
Hello.
Who is?
He's here.
Oh, he made it. Okay.
Yeah, we said 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Are you in Eastern Central Time or Eastern Standard Time?
No, I'm in Central.
Oh, okay. That was a miscommunication.
Okay. Okay.
I was communicated that it was at 11 o'clock EST.
Oh, damn, my bad.
Well, given how the stream audio just started a little bit ago, we could, if both of you guys have time, we could go ahead and just do the debate. Would both of you be okay with that?
Fine with
Yeah.
me.
Okay. So we will come back to this. I'm going to go ahead and mic the Q&A channel real quick.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely. Remember that Q&A so that I can answer it at the end because some
Yeah.
thought I wanted to give.
So let me get my timer set up. If you're watching this on YouTube, the other debater has shown up, so we're going to go ahead and get started on that. Adam, I'm going to ask you to repeat your opening, of course.
All right. Of course.
So, again, just a reminder, please ask questions in the Q&A questions only channel, and if you're already watching this on YouTube, you do have to join the Discord to take part in future events. The link to that should be in the description below. And with that, Adam, you have a 5-minute opening speech. If you're ready, you can start whenever.
All right. Hello, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to debate on this fine morning. I'm hoping for a respectful debate in which we can intellectually critique each other's arguments in order to seek the truth of the matter. My name's Adam. I'm a follower of Christ, and in my professional life, I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, and I'm a process engineer for a life science company. So all you atheists who think Christians don't understand math or science can take that. Today, I'll be defending the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God as presented by Dr. William Lane Craig. Almost everything I say can be found in his work somewhere, but I'll make sure to cite my sources when needed nevertheless. Before that, though, I would like to ask a quick question to my opponent and to the skeptical listeners. And the question is, do you want to believe in God? Do you think it would be good to have an all-powerful, all-knowing being watching over you, answering prayers, planning your life to be the best it can be, and offering salvation through his one and only Son so that you can experience heaven with him and experience the answer to the ultimate truth we're searching for? If you answer no to that question, no intellectual argument will convince you of God's existence. It may be a bit intellectually dishonest, but you will have to experience God in your heart before you have any chance of coming to know him in your mind. But if you answer yes, I hope you listen carefully to these arguments today and see that we can have rational faith in God. The Kalam cosmological argument is an answer to the age-old question of where do we come from, or how did we get here, or why is there something rather than nothing? The argument attempts to answer the question like this. Premise 1, anything which begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, and the conclusion which necessarily follows, therefore, the universe has a cause. I will also support a third premise and second conclusion to avoid the nonsense argument of the Kalam doesn't mention God. Premise 3, if the universe has a cause, that cause is God. Conclusion 2, therefore, God is the cause of the universe. In other words, if we go back in time, back and back and back, we eventually get back to the first cause. It is obvious to say that the first moment of time would have to be a cause rather than an effect without a cause, and that we would eventually get back to reach this first moment in time. The first cause must itself be uncaused and have been powerful enough to have caused everything else, including the beginning of the physical universe as we know it, since the physical universe, time, space, and matter, did not exist until they were caused. Moreover, it must have had the ability to decide to cause the universe to begin to exist, since because the cause existed beyond time, it could not have produced an effect within time otherwise. All of these attributes seem very close to how one could say what it means to be God. Now, this deductive argument is valid, meaning that if its premises are true, its conclusions necessarily follow. So, I will offer my defenses of each premise. For premise 1, anything which begins to exist has a cause. It is a metaphysical truth that follows from the phrase ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. This means that something cannot begin to exist from nothing. If it could, why don't we see that this happening more often? And how then are we able to constantly observe things to exist, or things beginning to exist with causes? For premise 2, the universe began to exist, we have scientific evidence including the validation of the Big Bang model of the origin of the universe and the second law of thermodynamics holding that if the universe had always existed, we would already be in a state of maximum disorder. We also have philosophical arguments for it, including the non-existence of actual infinities in the world, which means that the amount of time the universe has existed could not be actually infinite, and even if it could, there is no way we could have crossed an infinite amount of time to arrive at the present. Many atheists like to jump to attacking premise 3, but it is also very strongly supported. If the universe has a cause, that cause will have properties. The law of the excluded middle states that any statement about something is either true or its negation is true. For example, a property of the cause may be that it is either in space or spaceless, but since space does not yet exist, it would have to be spaceless. It may be material or immaterial, but since matter did not exist, it would be immaterial. It could be temporal and changing or timeless and changeless, but since time did not exist, it must be timeless and changeless. It could be powerful or not powerful, but since it created time, space, and matter, it would have to be powerful. And it could be personal or non-personal, but since the cause was always there, the effect would always be there also if it were a non-personal cause. So the only way for the cause to have always been there but produce a temporal effect would be for it to be able to decide or will the beginning of the universe, and for something to be able to make a decision. It must be personal. At the conclusion, we realize that all these properties we have deduced fit very closely with our definition of God. And that's my time.
Okay, you had 30 seconds remaining. KingXerxes, if you're ready, then I can reset the time. You also have a 5-minute opening. You can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, okay. So let's begin tonight by talking about the debate question. The debate question is simple. We're asking whether or not the Kalam cosmological argument specifically is a sound philosophical argument for the existence of God. I feel the need to draw attention to this, as I'm almost certain, note I wrote this in advance, that this point will be lost in the fervor of a much broader debate over the existence of God in general as we progress. Moving on, let me ask, what makes an argument sound? You see, a valid argument is one which the conclusion follows from the premises. A sound argument is a valid argument in which the premises are definitely correct. So my task, in order to demonstrate the Kalam is not sound, is to demonstrate that the conclusion does not follow from the premises are not correct, or both. And frankly, I think I can do both. So let's review the premises one more time. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The universe, therefore, then has a cause. Let's do the obvious and start with premise 1. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. Is this statement true? In other debates over this subject, I've noticed people tend to just grant this premise and focus on the second. The universe having a cause is not something which is either philosophically or scientifically conclusive. This premise, therefore, receives the most criticism. However, I would like to reflect the arguments of Quinton Smith, Scott Clifton, and J.L. Mackey and attack the first premise. This is something my opponent probably smirks at, and it is something that the primary defender of the argument, William Lane Craig, has responded to with rather sophomoric derision in the past. But are we so naive to think that our understanding of causal relationships should be extended to the whole of reality without modification? Well, Dr. Craig and my opponent would both likely say, yes, the first premise is substantiated, in their own words, by our intuition. Of course, human intuition has had a rather unimpressive track record when it comes to delivering accurate conclusions about the reality of certain natural phenomenon. But what if I just granted this premise? In fact, I will. I will grant that our understanding of cause and effect, which we have acquired through our experience with our local environment, should be applied to the whole of reality or the entirety of the universe itself. Does this get us to the universe requiring a cause? No. And why not? Well, because the second premise of this argument abandons our intuition, and therefore we have, unfortunately, generated a non sequitur with the Kalam cosmological argument. Allow me to demonstrate. My opponent does not believe the universe was caused to exist the same way that perhaps an automobile was caused to exist, which would be creatio ex materia, or creation out of material. No, my opponent, and the defender of this argument, William Lane Craig, believes in creatio ex nihilo, which is the theistic proposition of creation out of nothing. Simply put, God willed the universe into existence through his omnipotence alone. He did not act on any pre-existing material or stuff to cause the formation of the universe. This is not what our intuition tells us about cause and effect, yet it is our intuition that we are to accept as the justification for the first premise. My opponent makes this argument directly. This is a textbook equivocation fallacy. When we talk about causal relationships as we understand them intuitively, there's more to it than the Kalam invokes. Everything we experience which has a cause actually has at least two of them, an efficient cause and a material cause. An efficient cause would be the thing which initiates a causal relationship, and the material cause would be the thing which is being affected by the efficient cause to generate an ultimate effect. For example, if we return to the automobile, such a thing is not simply caused to exist. A Ford Mustang was not just brought into existence out of nothingness. Its true cause was the active and efficient cause affecting a material cause to bring into existence the Mustang, which would be a formal cause. The efficient cause would be the robot or active assembly. The material cause would be the fiberglass, metal, leather, and rubber, which by themselves are not a Ford Mustang, but are rearranged and assembled to become a Ford Mustang. By an efficient cause, i.e. the robot or the act of assembly. You can't affect something which doesn't exist. So before the Ford Mustang existed, it wasn't caused to do anything. The material from which the Mustang is composed was caused to become the Mustang. This does not in any way apply to the entirety of the universe. Watch this. The conclusion of the argument immediately becomes a non sequitur if we plug these two additional components in. Everything which begins to exist ex materia has a cause. The universe began to exist ex nihilo. Conclusion, the universe has a cause. Hopefully the fault in this new argument is apparent to everyone. But this is the real argument being made here when we actually break down what we mean by each premise individually. Put simply, creatio ex nihilo is purely speculative. If such an operation were possible, it would not be adhering to the causal principle that we intuitively apply to everything else we have experience with. If our intuition were truly a reliable modus for coming to metaphysical truths about the origin of our universe, then it would necessarily follow that the universe has both an efficient and a material cause.
Xerxes, I'm going to stop the 5 minutes have elapsed. So thank you for that. Next, I believe, is the rebuttals. Yes. So, Adam, you have first rebuttal. If you want to go ahead and start, you have 5 minutes. Also, I'm not sure if you realize, but your microphone is muted.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see if I can answer all this in 5 minutes. So first, it was argued that premise one is not philosophically or scientifically conclusive. And my opponent argues that it is based on intuition. So my defense for premise one, the philosophical defense is, as I said, out of nothing, nothing comes. This intuition is not the same as the type of intuition that is, mother's intuition. It is, our mind is a mirror on the nature of reality, I would say. And it makes no metaphysical sense for something to come out of nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes is a metaphysical first principle. For something to begin to exist without an efficient cause is for nothing to cause something to come into being. But nothing has no properties, no ability to cause something to come into existence. The moment we begin to think of nothing, it is no longer nothing. Nothingness cannot bring about anything other than more nothingness. However, the universe beginning to exist without an efficient cause would be just that. Therefore, the universe did not begin to exist without an efficient cause. Many atheists, including my opponent, claim the creation of the universe by God, ex nihilo, is nothing more than magic. But denying premise one is surely worse than magic. For, to borrow an analogy from Dr. Craig, at least when a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, you have the magician, not to mention the hat. Denying premise one would be to say that the rabbit could, in fact, begin to exist uncaused from nothing, not even magic or a lack of an efficient cause. I will skip my two scientific defenses for premise one for now. I can get back to those in discussion. My opponent also accuses me of making a fallacy of composition, saying that because everything in the universe begins to exist, that I'm applying that to the universe as a whole. I think I've already answered that question, based on my defense of P1, but I will say that this argument is also in a video by Dr. Craig, which is the worst objections to the Kalam cosmological argument, objections so bad I could not have made them up on YouTube. This argument does not depend on the fact, my argument, that things within the universe begin to exist for support. The philosophical defense is a metaphysical first principle, meaning beyond the natural, not a physical one. It applies to existence in general. Let's see. I'll also address the efficient and material cause really quickly. I've never argued that everything in the universe has to have, or including the universe itself, has to have a material cause. I only argue that everything which begins to exist has an efficient cause. Therefore, I'm not equivocating a material cause in the first premise with an efficient cause in the second premise. In fact, you could actually substitute the same definition that my opponent thinks I'm using in the second premise into the first premise, to where the argument would look something more like, if the universe began to exist, the universe has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. There is no problem with this. It is still equally valid, sound, and a deductive argument. And it mentions the universe beginning to exist ex nihilo in both premises. And see if is there anything else I should go ahead and address? I think that'll be all for now.
Okay. We have 1 minute and 32 seconds remaining. KingXerxes, you also have a 5-minute rebuttal if you want to go ahead and get started. We're ready whenever
Yep.
you are.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So my opponent seems to have misunderstood my initial argument. My objection to the first premise was not what he thought it was. I'll quote what I said in my paragraph there. Okay. Let's do the obvious and start with premise 1. Everything which begins to exist as a cause. Is this statement true? In other debates over this subject, I've noticed people tend to just grant this premise and focus on the second. The second premise is the one I was referring to when I said the universe having a cause is not something which is either philosophically or scientifically conclusive. Now, my opponent went on to argue in favor of the first premise using intuition, which is what I had said previously. That our intuition about causal relationships should be extended to the whole of reality without modification. This is, in fact, what Dr. Craig and my opponent are arguing, that the first premise is intuitive. It's a metaphysical, intuitive truth. And Dr. Craig and my opponent would both probably say that to deny this causal principle would be to be blind to the evidence, that we should just accept that our intuition about cause and effect is true and that it applies to the universe. But my opponent is equivocating here, because our intuition about cause and effect demands that anything which is caused has both an efficient and a material cause, not just one or the other, But that is what my opponent is arguing, that that the universe, which is somehow applying to the same rules of cause and effect that we understand, is only with an efficient cause, not an efficient and a material cause, just an efficient cause, that it wasn't made out of anything, that God literally affected nothing, and that somehow facilitated the origination of the universe out of a vacuum. But that's incoherent. That isn't something that we can actually understand. And if that is, in fact, what God used to create the universe, if that is the operation that he used, then our understanding of cause and effect doesn't apply. And the Kalam cosmological argument is not sound, because it's relying on our understanding of cause and effect to have a valid conclusion. But it's not valid if God is playing by a different set of rules. Take another analogy, for example. If we are to review the game of baseball, right, everybody would probably agree that in order to hit a home run, you need both a ball and a bat to hit the home run. But if my opponent were to come along and suggest that you need only a bat to hit a home run, well, then he's probably using a different set of rules for the game of baseball. And would it be appropriate for us to use our understanding of the current rules for baseball to try and understand how somebody could hit a home run with just the bat, or without a bat, or without a ball? No, that wouldn't make any sense. That would be a set of rules beyond our understanding. And to suggest that an efficient cause is all there is for the universe is incoherent, because that's not what we have experience with. It would be no less coherent for me to suggest that a material cause is all that is necessary for the universe. Because if an efficient cause could generate an effect by affecting nothing, by affecting no material, then perhaps a material cause could generate an effect by being affected by nothing. They're both equally nonsense, but there's no reason to reject one and not the other. And I think that is something that even my opponent is aware of, that if we allow for a God to create the universe without operating by the causal principle that we understand, which I would actually consider to be the double causal principle, he didn't affect anything, but somehow generated an effect. That's incoherent. And it's no more coherent to say that something was affected by nothing and generated an effect. So if the universe didn't exist at one point, God couldn't simply have caused it to exist, because what would he be affecting? The universe? Well, no, because he can't affect the universe before the universe exists. Nothing? Well, that's incoherent, which leaves the third option, that God affected material to bring the universe into existence. But my opponent wouldn't accept that, because if that is the case, where did God get the material from? Did he create that? And if so, what did he create that out of? And if he didn't, and if he didn't create that, then why is he necessary at all? If something can exist that wasn't created by God or brought into actualization by God, why couldn't everything exist not brought into actualized by God? Which kind of leads into the question my opponent asked when he said, why is it the case that not everything is just being caused to exist out of nothing? And the simple reason for that is because once something exists, no longer can anything be created out of nothing. Everything is now created out of something or generated from something. The rules change. If you go from a state of non-existence to existence, then after that, everything is now subsequently coming from existence, and it couldn't be any other way. That's just axiomatic. So I don't think my opponent's question applies there, but I'll go ahead and wrap it up for now so we can get into the open dialogue.
5 minutes have elapsed. So thank you guys for those great speeches. We are now going to enter a 30-minute open discussion. I'm going to go ahead and let Adam start us off. I will be doing some moderation if I feel like there is a disagreement about definitions about words that isn't being cleared up, or if we have strayed off topic. But other than that, I'm just going to let you two go at it. Adam, whenever you're ready. And your microphone is muted again.
Sorry, my phone was locked and I had to unlock it. All right. Let's see. So I think I have been my case has been misrepresented, strawmanned in a way, when my opponent argues that I have only relied on our understanding of causation to support the first premise. I think that I have in no way argued that a material cause is necessary for anything. For example, look at the quantum level of quantum vacuum fluctuations causing the temporary existence of virtual particles popping into existence. The particles are themselves new creations caused by vacuum fluctuations. They do not have a material cause because there was no prior existing material, only the energy which exists in the quantum vacuum. It's just one example.
Energy is material.
I would not argue that, but even granting that, there is no principle that I've ever argued that says everything which begins to exist must have a material cause. If there was no material, then it could not have had a material cause, but you would not expect an effect from an efficient cause with also a material cause when there was no prior material existing in the first place. It would have to be an efficient cause, kind of similar to my magician analogy. At least with magic, you have a magician. The magician is, in the same way as God, able to produce something out of a lack of material. But
a magician can't really do that. It's a trick of the eyes. He does have some material effect.
It's an analogy, obviously.
Okay, but your first premise, everything which begins to exist has a cause, is supported by our intuition. Even Craig admits this.
It's supported by our intuition as it is a mirror on the world, but also just sound metaphysical argument. Out of nothing, nothing comes. This isn't just intuitive. It wouldn't make sense. So if you picture...
If we were to apply that consistently, then God couldn't create the universe out of nothing, because out of nothing, nothing comes.
Well, God is not nothing. Is
he creating the universe out of himself?
No, he is creating... When I say God is not nothing, I'm saying when I say things cannot begin to exist out of nothing, I mean without an efficient cause. God is the efficient cause. Therefore, that's not nothing.
Okay, well, everything which begins to exist doesn't just have an efficient cause. It has an efficient cause and a material cause. The universe would be the sole exception to this principle. Everything that we have experience with which has a cause has both, not just one or the other.
Sorry, say that last part again.
Everything we have experience with, everything that you have ever observed or interacted with, has both an efficient and a material cause, not just one or the other. You are arguing for a different set of rules for the universe.
I'm not arguing that because everything in the universe has a material cause, that the universe itself has a material cause.
That's exactly my point, Adam. You are arguing that the universe itself can have just an efficient cause, Whereas everything else we've ever had experience with has both an efficient and a material cause.
Okay, but the universe doesn't have to have a material cause, but it does have to have an efficient cause. Just because everything in the universe has
And
a
you have
material
no
cause does
justification
not.
for that. You have no justification for that.
Why? How can you explain how nothing would begin or would cause something to become existing?
How
Here, let me give an analogy.
How can you explain how God could affect nothing to generate an effect?
Let me give an analogy real fast. So imagine you have two people discussing World War II, and one is saying nothing stopped the German advance on the Russian army, and the second person says, "Oh, phew! I'm so glad that the advance was stopped." And the first person says, "No, I said nothing stopped it." And the second person says, "Yeah, so it was stopped." The first person says, "No, if I say nothing stopped the German advance, it means it was not stopped. So if I say nothing caused the universe to come into existence, it did not come into existence. However, with an efficient cause, it still can come into existence. There does not have to be a material cause. I've never argued that, and I would not support that."
Yeah, I could play that same analogy and say that if the universe was caused to exist out of nothing, the universe wasn't caused to exist. Or if God acted on nothing to create the universe, then he didn't act. It's logically synonymous. You are attempting to play a different set of rules by invoking the rules that we understand, cause and effect. But it's not just cause and effect, it's cause affect effect. There has to be something being affected to generate an ultimate effect. The universe, if at some point it did not exist, couldn't have come into existence out of nothing. God had to affect something. What is it that he affected?
I think you are completely mistaken with the idea that God had to affect something. There's no physical law that said that there had to be something there to be affected, because if
Okay,
something
sure.
begins to exist, if something begins to exist at all, then there doesn't necessarily, for example, look at
Adam.
abstract object, contingent abstract objects. So for example, the
Adam.
equator of the Earth, let me finish. The equator of the Earth, for example, is a contingent abstract object. It is not made out of any material, but it still has an efficient cause, which is the Earth beginning to exist, which causes the equator to begin to exist. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It is not material. The notes on the page are not the same as the symphony itself, nor are the instruments, nor are the people playing it. It is an abstract object which is not material, but still began to exist.
Okay. Well, what's funny though is that William Lane Craig is a nominalist. Are you?
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, yeah, I actually would not argue for the existence of.
Okay, so you are
abstract
using
objects, but I
something
think
you don't
most
even believe
atheists do.
exists to defend this argument. You don't believe that the prime meridian or the equator actually exists, but you're bringing them up as a justification for your assumption that something can exist with an efficient cause. How silly is that? You don't
William
actually
Lane
believe
Craig.
these things
William Lane
exist.
Craig does not have any theological objections to the existence of contingent abstract objects. He only has an objection to the existence of necessarily abstract or necessarily existing abstract objects, which is why I
Okay,
brought
but he
those
doesn't think they
examples.
exist, and neither do you. That's the point.
I
You
actually
don't
do.
actually think the
No.
equator exists, not in the same way
I
that the
actually
universe
do,
does.
because
But
I
Adam,
have no problem with that, and I do agree that they exist. I just don't agree that necessarily existing abstract objects exist.
okay, but Adam, here's the other flaw in your argument. The prime meridian and the equator aren't made of anything, and therefore don't require anything to be made out of. The universe is made out of something. Matter, energy. The universe has physical components to it that can't have just popped out of the ether if we're going to play the game of our intuitions consistently. You keep saying that from nothing, nothing comes, but you immediately abandon that by suggesting that God facilitated the eruption of something out of nothing, the eruption of existence out of non-existence. This is a non
It's
sequitur.
from no. It's not
Textbook non
from
sequitur.
non-existence. It's from no prior material. There's no metaphysical, logical inconsistencies with creation from no prior existing material. There's a much bigger problem.
Only if you want to play the game of our intuitions.
Let me finish. There's a much bigger problem with the coming into being of material from no efficient or material cause than there is with just no material cause.
And there's so you are much missing the point. If we can postulate that the universe can come into existence without a material cause, it's just as logically valid to suggest that the universe could come into existence or be caused to exist without an efficient cause. So long as you have one or the other, that's the game that you're playing, and that doesn't match. Our intuitions tell us you need both an efficient and a material cause. And by that understanding, the definition of the word cause wouldn't even apply to the origination of the universe because we can't define that word in such a way that it would accurately represent what happened for the universe to come out of nothing. Creatio ex nihilo, which is the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument that the universe itself was not created out of any pre-existing material, but it relies on the first premise, which is creatio ex materia. Everything which begins to exist ex materia has a cause. The universe began to exist ex nihilo, therefore the universe has a cause. That's a non sequitur. We don't have experience with anything being created out of nothing, where God just wills the universe into existence via omnipotence alone. But maybe, I'm not saying he didn't do it or couldn't have done it, but the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't get us there because it's a non sequitur. You are applying a principle by which we need two components and then pretending as though that justifies a principle by which we only need one. Everything that I'm interacting with right now, my laptop, my computer, you, we all had material causes and efficient causes.
The only arguments that I have used that invoke the scientifically or inductively invoke the coming into existence from material causes are my two scientific defenses, which is one, we don't see anything popping into being all the time uncaused, such as tables, chairs, buildings, planets. We don't have any evidence of things beginning to exist all the time without an efficient cause, which suggests that
or a material cause. Stop jettisoning that.
To exist without an efficient
Adam,
cause.
stop jettisoning the material cause. Everything that you just mentioned also has a material cause.
Yes, it does because it's in the universe. But if it could come in, if it popped into being without an efficient cause, we would suddenly say that the first premise was not necessarily true. But
how is it the case that the first premise can't be true if we remove an efficient cause, but it can be true if we remove the material cause? Do you not see how you're being inconsistent here?
I am not being inconsistent at all. I'm not invoking that. The scientific
Adam, you just brought forth examples. Adams, you just brought forth examples, all of which have a material cause, and now you're pretending as though the universe doesn't need a material cause. But you're not applying that consistently.
Wait. If these objects were to pop into being in space, first of all, this is only one side of my objection or response. If these objects were to pop into being in space, they could not have a material cause because if they were in space, that is where there is no material for there to be a cause. Secondly, I specifically gave those examples to suggest that these are the only arguments which I am giving which invoke our current sense of cause and effect, which require a material cause. However, my philosophical defense, ex nihilo nihil fit, out of nothing nothing comes, does not require our basic understanding of cause and effect with a material cause to support the premise. So, hold on, let me get a drink of water. My mouth is dry.
There also might be a little bit of confusion here. Could you guys go ahead and define like what an efficient cause is?
Oh,
okay, yeah, sure. So, I did this in my opening. An efficient cause is the first step of the cause and effect relationship. It is the actor or the act which initiates the causal relationship. So let's take, for example, the Ford Mustang, which I talked about earlier. The efficient cause would be the robot or the person assembling the Mustang, or the act of assembly itself. Both would work. And the material cause would be the stuff that the Ford Mustang is made out of. The leather, fiberglass, metal, aluminum, rubber, all that stuff, which by themselves are not a Ford Mustang, are now reassembled to become a Ford Mustang. And everything that we have experience with, literally everything that we have experience with, has both an efficient and a material cause. There is some actor, which doesn't necessarily have to be an intelligent being, acting upon some pre-existing thing to generate an effect. But you have to have both of those steps. You can't just have one or the other, because if you were to propose that an efficient cause exists which caused some other event without a material cause, what you're suggesting is that this thing affected no thing to generate something. That doesn't make any sense. It's immediately incoherent, but that's what Adam is arguing, that God created the universe out of nothing by affecting nothing. That's not something that we have experience with, nor could we even begin to comprehend, and it is wildly inappropriate to suggest that our understanding of cause and effect could logically conclude that God could create something out of nothing. I mean, he keeps repeating, from nothing, nothing comes. Yeah, I'm going to agree with that.
I think I see your problem. You're invoking our scientific understanding of cause and effect to explain the metaphysical understanding of cause and effect that we have. I think
I'm just invoking our intuition, which is what you're doing.
You can't wait. What did you say?
I'm invoking our intuition, which is what you're doing and what Craig does when he defends
I'm not
this
invoking
argument.
intuition at all. I'm invoking metaphysics, sound observation, or not observation, sound metaphysical deduction that has never been.
It's not sound. You are not soundly deducing this.
Yes, okay. Have you ever pictured something trying to come into being with a material cause, but without an efficient cause? It makes far less sense. Exactly, it makes far less sense for that to happen than for something to come into being with an efficient cause than without a material cause. So
no, they both make equally no sense at all.
Let me finish. For something to come into being with an efficient cause and without a material cause makes much more sense than something to come into being without either.
What you're saying is it makes less sense for you to hit a home run without a ball than it does for you to hit a home run without a bat. No, neither one of them make any sense. They're both equally incoherent. A material cause generating an effect.
In my defense, your worldview is much more incoherent than mine is. Even if you were to argue that they were equally incoherent,
no, you don't have any substantiation for that. So I first of all, I don't think that the universe just had a material cause. I don't think the universe was caused. I think that it's silly and naive of us to apply the word cause to the whole of reality itself without modification, because that's just not something we can understand, which is something even yourself are arguing because you think God is playing by a different set of rules. Everything we have experience with is creatio ex materia, creation out of material. Okay, these causal relationships are relationships. They require two things to be there. And your suggestion
that because things have material causes in the universe, that therefore we know that the universe has a cause. That is not my
argument. You're not arguing that. That's the problem, because your first premise, everything which begins to exist as a cause, is justified by our intuition that that's true. But that's not 100% true. Everything which begins to exist ex materia has a cause. That's what our intuition tells us, because things which exist ex materia are things we have experience with. We don't have experience with anything that was created out of nothing or creatio ex nihilo. So how can we possibly apply what we know about creation from materia to creatio ex nihilo? That doesn't follow. That is by definition a non sequitur.
Our intuition that things begin to exist with a material cause. Honestly, I disagree that that's our intuition. I could certainly
really. So can you provide me an example of anything that you've ever observed or interacted with that came into existence without a material cause?
I'm not saying I could, but what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily intuitive. I'm saying it's not intuitive. So I'm saying that I would more closely be able to imagine something with an efficient cause without a material cause coming into being, rather than something without any cause coming into being.
Yeah, I don't disagree. You could do that, but that's because you came to that conclusion before you ever generated the argument. You are funneling toward a pre-assumed conclusion. My point is that argument does not soundly get us there. That's been the argument from the outset. I understand that you believe God exists and you think that that's somehow more reasonable, that God could affect nothing to create something than nothing could be affected by nothing to create something. I mean, they're both equally nonsense to me, but to you, you think the one is more, one is somehow more justifiable than the other, which you have yet to demonstrate. And I'm fine with that. Whatever, you can believe a God exists, but that's why you are funneling toward that direction. You have a pre-conclusion, and you were trying to use the Kalam to get there. But what I'm pointing out to you is that it does not get us there soundly. The premises do not line up together. Premise 1 and premise 2 are talking about two entirely different versions of the word begin. 1, to begin out of material or to begin out of something else, and 2, to begin out of absolutely nothing. God affected nothing and facilitated the eruption of existence from non-existence.
I would be happy if you were to substitute the second, the way you are implying that I'm using the word cause in the second premise, just substitute that into the first premise.
Okay, well, let's play that then. Everything which begins to exist ex nihilo.
No, I'm saying...
Or everything which begins to exist ex nihilo has a cause.
Here's what it will look like. If the universe began to exist ex nihilo, then the universe has a cause. If the universe began to exist ex nihilo, The universe began to exist ex nihilo, therefore the universe has a cause.
Now, how do you justify that the universe began to exist? Well, let's assume the universe did begin to exist ex nihilo. How do you justify that it needs a cause? Where are you extrapolating from to justify that?
Because if it did not have a cause, then it would be caused by nothing, and for it to be caused by nothing, it would never have begun to exist. Similar to
Well, you have no problem with it being created out of nothing. You have no problem with it being creatio ex nihilo, created out of nothing, but you're stuck up on this idea that it couldn't have come from nothing. What sense does that make?
When I say ex nihilo, I mean without material. I'm not saying without an efficient cause. You're equivocating yourself.
It's still coming from no thing. God is acting on no thing and somehow facilitating the eruption of existence or non-existence.
He's acting on no material thing, sure, but he is certainly.
And to act on nothing is the same thing as not acting at all.
That is not true. If I
you literally used an analogy to get there the same way that I just did. When you talked about World War II and you talked about the invasion, to say that nothing caused the invasion is to say the same thing as that the invasion didn't happen at all. Well, to say that nothing was affected to create the universe is the same thing as to say that the universe wasn't created at all.
You made a statement that says if I act on nothing, that is the same as saying nothing. I haven't acted at all. If I wave my hand, I have acted. I have waved my hand, but I haven't acted on anything.
No, your neurons acted on your nervous system to move your hand through the air, which displaced air and caused your hand to move from one location to the other. All of that was acting on something to generate an effect. You were literally proposing absolutely nothing was acted upon. Absolutely nothing was affected, and that generated an effect. Even if I granted that God could somehow do that because he's all-powerful, it wouldn't matter because we can't get there with our intuitions. We can't justify creatio ex nihilo by appealing to everything which exists to our understanding that we have access to, which exists ex materia. That's the point that I'm making. They are non sequitur. Just listen one more time. Premise one: everything which begins to exist ex materia has a cause. That's justifiable because that's what we have experience with. I know you're not. I know you're not arguing that. Because you're not arguing it consistently. That's my point. When you say everything which begins to exist has a cause, you are appealing to everything that we have experience with. Literally everything we've ever interacted with or observed, and everything that we've ever interacted with or observed exists or began to exist ex materia. But we aren't justified in saying
we aren't anything which began to exist ex nihilo has a cause.
But you don't have any justification for that because we have no understanding of how creatio ex nihilo could operate because it's pure speculation.
We don't have to have an understanding of how it would operate because the alternative is that it came about from no efficient cause, which is much more absurd.
No, I don't think it is. You haven't justified that. You have not justified why it is more absurd for God to hit a home run without a ball than it is for a home run to be hit without a bat. You have yet to justify that, and I would very much like you to.
Your analogy is not good because we're not dealing with baseball.
You're removing one of the components from the equation, so yeah. 2 + 2 equals 4. Now you're just saying 2 + equals 4.
I'm only removing an opponent from the a component from the equation because it's not necessary. It would be like saying if I...
Why is it not necessary? That's what you need to justify.
Defenders aren't necessary, which they're not. I can hit a home run without anyone in the outfield.
So thanks for just changing my analogy. My point is that the mechanism of hitting a home run requires a ball and a bat. The mechanism of cause and effect requires an efficient and a material cause, and then a formal and a final cause if you want to get really Aristotelian about it.
Well, you haven't demonstrated that everything requires a material cause. You've only
universe
requires a material cause.
I am playing the game that you are. I'm appealing to my intuition. That is what Craig says justifies the causal principle, and it's what you said justifies the causal principle in your first and your second monologue. So your opening and your rebuttal, you appeal to an intuition twice. But my intuition does not permit something creating out of nothing. That is not something that I could even remotely comprehend, let alone intuit. Everything I have experience with creates ex materia.
You're appealing to observation, not to intuition.
our intuitions are formulated by our observations, which is why I made the note of pointing out that our intuitions don't have a very impressive track record when it comes to coming to reliable conclusions about nature. It was our intuition that led us to believe the sun is orbiting the Earth.
I see. Okay, that's also due to observation. I see where the problem is. Our intuitions, I would argue, are at their most underlying basic components are always right. These are the laws of thought.
And it's not my intuition that things can begin to exist out of nothing in any capacity, regardless of whether or not they have one or two causes.
Well, then you shouldn't believe that the universe began to exist.
I don't. I mean, if you want to go there, yeah, I don't. I don't think the second premise is valid. I don't think the universe began to exist because the way in which we use that word wouldn't apply to something coming from absolutely nothing.
So you think that the universe started to exist but never began to exist?
No, I don't.
Has a first moment in time, or does it not have a first?
No, I don't. I don't think that. I don't think that the universe can in any way be described using cause and effect, because we're necessarily talking about a temporal relationship between two things which exist. And that the universe is the summation of everything that exists. What sense does it make to say it itself was caused? Because everything that we know about cause and effect demands that there be antecedent material and action to generate an effect. But that isn't what you're arguing. And I don't care. I mean, I'll grant you that creatio ex nihilo is possible. It's incoherent. It's not something that we can understand. And it's most certainly not something that we can extrapolate to using our understanding of cause and effect. We don't get there.
Using the term incoherent. Incoherent would mean something that's against the laws of logic. Something that has an inherent contradiction. There's no inherent contradiction.
Yeah, there is.
No, there's not. There is no. There's no logical contradiction that says that things cannot be created ex nihilo. It is only a contradiction of science, basically saying that.
Wait a minute. Hold on.
To exist from no prior existing material does not seem scientifically possible.
Okay. Setting that aside for a moment, again, you were the one defending from nothing, nothing comes, and then immediately abandoning that when you invoke God. But God isn't a something in the way that we understand that word to mean.
God,
and he wasn't affecting anything.
Certainly not nothing. I don't see what you don't understand about
but
that.
But he's not. If he was the only thing that existed, he would be affecting nothing to create the universe. The material of the universe, the matter and energy and everything that we experience and interact with, that isn't God. That's something that God created. And the question is, out of what did he create that? Your answer to that question is nothing. If that's the case, it doesn't get us anywhere because we can't extrapolate to that. That is literally incoherent to us, because for God to create something out of nothing, that is to violate the logical identity of what it means to be nothing. As soon as he creates something out of nothing, nothing is nothing and not nothing at the same time. That's the violation of the law of non-contradiction.
All right, I understand where your problem is. You were equivocating nothing as literally nothing. When we say creation, creatio ex nihilo, we are saying no prior existing material. That is not necessarily.
So then what did God create the universe out of?
No prior existing material.
I'm not asking you what he didn't create the universe out of. I'm asking you what he did create the universe out of.
That question is incoherent because there was no material.
And again, we have the let's not apply it consistently game. So, you argue that it's not incoherent for God to create the universe out of no prior existing material, but you argue that it is incoherent for me to ask what he did create it out of. This is phenomenal. I can't for the life of me figure out how you're not seeing this. We are playing.
If there was no material that existed, of course he did not create it out of any material. He is powerful.
Okay. And if he didn't create it out of any material, then we can't apply our understanding of cause and effect to the generation of the universe.
In this debate, you have said you would grant that ex nihilo creation is possible.
But it's not something that we can get to basing off of what we understand to be the relationship of cause and effect. God would be playing by a different set of rules than we have access to. Creatio ex nihilo is speculative because we don't have experience with that, nor could we, because if we exist, there's a something, and as a result of that, then everything which begins to exist out of something and by something. Now, you brought up quantum fluctuations earlier, and funny you should mention that, considering that Craig himself allows for something to have a material cause but not an efficient cause because of quantum fluctuations. They don't pop into existence out of nothing, but they do seem to come into existence uncaused by anything else.
I would certainly argue that they're caused efficiently, just not deterministically. It's more probable.
How could you argue that they have an efficient cause? What is the act or actor that is bringing the quantum fluctuations into existence?
No, I'm talking about the virtual particles. The fluctuations don't begin to exist. The particles do. The
Okay, and what act or actor brings them into existence?
The fluctuations of energy.
Okay, energy is material.
Okay.
So they would then therefore have a material cause.
Actually, I wouldn't argue energy is material, but
well, then you would have a completely different definition of what you mean by material than I do.
I'm just going to accept that. It's really not even central to my argument. Let's see, what was I going to say? You argue that God plays by a different set of rules. I never argued that God did not have to play by a different set of rules. He is completely within his right and power as an all-powerful being to play by a different set of rules. He can.
Yeah, sure. But then the Kalam is a non sequitur.
With no prior existing material, that's completely fine.
Yeah, sure. Okay. But then the Kalam is a non sequitur because the first premise is justified by what we know regarding cause and effect. We cannot say that something coming into existence out of nothing is in any way coherent or logical or something that we can understand. Cause and effect, the way that we understand it, is exclusively a two-party system. Efficient causes and material causes, and then if you want to get Aristotelian, you have your formal and your final cause subsequent to that, but the efficient and the material cause are really all that's important for this conversation. Everything that we have experience with, literally everything, nothing excluded, everything that we have experience with has a material and efficient cause. So when you say that everything which begins to exist has a cause, you are appealing to that which we have experience with. Everything.
For the third or fourth time, I am not appealing to that at all. I'm only appealing.
Then your first premise is unjustified, and therefore the argument isn't sound.
No, it is justified on metaphysics.
It's not justified on metaphysics. You are cherry picking the metaphysics. What metaphysics tell us is that everything has an efficient and a material cause. You are arguing for the antithesis of that.
Let's argue. Let's say for a second the first premise is false. If the first premise is false, its negation would be true metaphysically as well, since the truth of its negation would then allow the universe to begin to exist from nothing, and it would not be affected by physics, because if physics could not affect something that was metaphysical. So
you already believe the universe began to exist from nothing,
guys. So 30 minutes have elapsed, so we're going to move into closing statements now. King, I believe you are taking the first closing statement. Let me double check the time real quick. Yeah, okay, so you have a 5-minute closing statement. You're ready to begin whenever you're ready, King.
Okay, give me just a moment. All right. The conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument does not follow from the premises if we were to apply the premises consistently. The first premise, everything which begins to exist as a cause, is justified by our intuitions about causation. Ask yourself, can you really conceive of anything coming into existence out of nothing? Even if you believe in some divine actor or agency that's creating it, what is he creating it out of? You can't describe what that is by telling yourself what it isn't. Everything that we have experience with has both an efficient and a material cause. It was created by something and out of something. And if we're going to apply that to the universe, then we would say that the universe was created out of something and by something. But if the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument is that the universe was created by something, but not out of something, then the argument is a non sequitur by definition, because the first premise does not connect with the second premise, and therefore the conclusion does not follow. We are talking about two entirely different set of rules here. One, which we have local experience with, and which we can intuitively justify, because we don't see that it could be any way else. And the other, which is pure speculation designed for the entire and sole purpose of funneling to a pre-assumed conclusion that God exists. Because both my opponent and the defender of this argument, William Lane Craig, concluded that from the outset. They didn't use the Kalam cosmological argument to get there. No, they're Christians first, philosophers second. As soon as the argument fails, it's no meaning to them. They can just fall back on faith, the revelation of Jesus Christ through faith. But the debate wasn't over, does God exist? The debate is over, is the Kalam cosmological argument sound? I think that I have demonstrated that it is not. We're playing by two different sets of rules. And if a syllogism is going to be sound, if it's going to be a valid method for determining its conclusion, then both premises have to play by the same set of rules. Don't get to special plead your way out of that one, which itself is also a fallacy. So, let's put it this way. Everything which begins to exist ex materia has a cause. That we know. That we can justify. The universe began to exist ex nihilo. Conclusion, therefore, the universe had a cause. Put another way, everything we have experience with was created out of something. The universe wasn't created out of anything. Conclusion, therefore, the universe was created. Gears ticking a little bit? Are they turning in your head a little bit? Do you recognize the error in that? That's a non sequitur. The conclusion doesn't follow. I don't care if God created the universe out of nothing. That's an entirely different argument. But if he did, then the rules he's playing by aren't the ones we have access to. And therefore, it's both pathologically egomaniacal and outright absurd to suggest for an instant that our understanding of cause and effect can be applied to the whole of reality without any slight modification. That's my conclusion.
Okay, you had 2 minutes remaining. You set the time. Adam, you also have 5-minute rebuttals or closing speech. Before we get started into that, I would like to remind the audience to post questions into the Q&A questions only text channel, and also remember to say who it is for. We still need a lot more questions for that to be a fun time for all of us. So, Adam, if you're ready, we can begin your closing speech whenever.
All right, thank you. First, I would like to say that I'm a little disappointed that we only spent so much time on the first premise. I think the other two are very compelling and interesting to get into. However, I think that my opponent has multiple times strawmanned me by attempting to insert the words ex materia into the first premise and ex nihilo into the second premise. I have never once argued that because our intuitions or observation have confirmed that things need a material cause, that that's the reason for the first premise's truthfulness. I would say rather that if everything we exist material and efficient cause, there was at a point, before the creation of the universe or before the beginning, which I would assume my opponent does not argue that there's a beginning of the universe at all, but sans the universe without a universe, when there was no physical material existence, there could not have been a material cause. However, that does not exclude the universe from requiring an efficient cause. That is particularly my argument, that everything we have ever seen, or part of my argument, I should say, the scientifical defense of premise one is that we have seen everything begin to exist with an efficient cause. Just because there was no material does not mean that there also cannot or does not have to be an efficient cause. If the first principle was false, the negation would be true metaphysically, since the truth of the negation would then allow the begin to exist from nothing. That means that if anything which begins to exist does not have to have a cause, that principle would be true and would allow the universe to begin to exist. Nothing physical or abstract can stop things from popping into existence in that case. In other words, even the laws of physics cannot constrain nothing, for there is nothing to be constrained. If something could begin to exist uncaused when nothing else was there, there is nothing stopping things from beginning to exist uncaused when there's something that already exists. Popping into being, lacking an efficient cause without the universe existing, would be no different than doing so lacking an efficient cause with the universe existing. But denying premise one is to say that things should be able to begin to exist uncaused, whether it has a material cause or not. Why then do they not? Whether it has an efficient cause or not? Or more applicably, why can only universes pop into existence? What property of nothing could allow it to discriminate so that only universes may begin to exist uncaused? That wraps up my defense, I'd say, for premise one. And again, I'm sad that we didn't get to the rest of the premises.
Okay, you had 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. With that, the debate proper has come to a close, but we are going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A section. First question is for Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you not define mathematical constructs as axiomatic?
I'm not sure what you mean. How is that relevant? I guess that's not your question.
Okay.
Yeah, I have an answer for that.
I'm guessing to steal man things here. There was in reference to your opening speech. So, like, whenever you're talking about I'm trying to place the correct context here, but I'm not having an easy time doing that. Literally, the devil, if you want to clarify that, we can come back to that question. Next question is also for Adam. Does the Kalam cosmological argument only work if you support substance dualism, mind and matter, or can you be substance monist to believe in the KCA?
Okay, so you're referring to something like the mind and body problem, or materialism, something like that.
Probably.
So, yeah, I think, let's see. There's a view many atheists hold called Myriological Nihilism, which is the view that only material objects exist that are made up, or sorry, only this mereological symbols exist, which means the fundamental particles are the only objects which begin to or which exist at all. So any composite objects, chairs, tables, stuff like that, do not exist. That's the view of the mereological nihilist. Could you repeat the question again so I don't get?
Does the KCA only work if you support substance dualism, or can you be substance monist to believe in the KCA? Essentially, do you have to believe in both mind and matter, or can you only believe in one? I believe it to be substance monist would be matter only. So can you believe in mind and matter, or matter only to believe in the KCA?
Okay, yeah, I think I was going off on a little bit of a tangent there. I would say that the Kalam cosmological argument actually is more of an argument in support of the dualism hypothesis. So the Kalam cosmological argument argues for the existence of something that is non-physical and something that is an unembodied mind.
Okay. And then one question for Xerxes, or for King. What do you think of the Kalam's validity, assuming our universe is a simulation within another?
Well, if our universe was a simulation within another, then it would have both a material and an efficient cause. So if we applied the premises consistently, premise 1, everything which begins to exist has a material and an efficient cause. Premise 2, the universe has an efficient and a material cause. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause, or I should have worded that better. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has both an efficient and a material cause. Then yeah, that would follow, because if we're applying it consistently, it would follow. Of course, there'd be a different debate about whether or not you can justify that with our intuition. But if I grant that, like I did in this argument, then yeah, sure, the Kalam would be sound, assuming we modify the premises to be consistent with one another, which was my point from the beginning.
Okay. Another question for Adam. What does it mean for something to come into existence or begin to exist without time?
Yeah, so without time, I think a lot of people will say that something cannot have begun to exist without time. So that would require time to exist. So what I would say is that let me find. Give me 1 second. Having trouble finding it. The first moment in time is God's willing to create the universe. So it's simultaneous with it. There does not have to be time before time existed. That wouldn't make any sense. For the material to have been caused to begin to exist, I would say that rather the first cause was the first moment in time. They're simultaneous with one. Though the willing of God to create matter from no prior existing matter is explanatorily prior to the first moment in time, which means that the first moment in time does not cause things to begin to exist. Rather, things begin to exist causes the first moment in time.
Okay. We have another question for King. Do you deny that something can come out of nothing even with supernatural intervention? And if you do, what is your proof for that? King, do you need me to repeat the question?
I don't know if he's there.
You're not coming through at the moment.
Oh, I apologize. My mic was muted. I forgot about that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me answer that. So, I don't think that supernatural intervention is a thing. That's the whole point. Like, I don't believe in the supernatural, so I wouldn't consider that any kind of intervention could be supernatural. I don't think anything comes from nothing. That's That's silly. If you're coming from nothing, that's the same thing as saying you're not coming from anything. I don't think the universe performed the verb to come from. I think the universe just is, or at least the whole of reality just is. And I think that no matter what your worldview is, at some point you're going to meet some fundamental substrate that you can't justify, and your only explanation is it is because it is. I think the universe is that, or at least reality. So, no, I don't think that supernatural interventions explain something coming from nothing. That entire concept is nonsense, in my opinion.
Could I ask a question a little bit off topic, just kind of something that I had wanted to ask earlier, if you don't mind?
If it's quick, go ahead.
Okay. So I feel like a lot of atheists attempt to deny both premises when really you only need to deny one in order to not deny the conclusion. My question for King is, which premise, one or two, do you think you would more readily deny? Like, which one do you think is less true, in your opinion?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that premise one is not true applied to premise two. I don't think that they're being applied consistently, because premise two is obviously invoking that the universe was created out of nothing or caused to exist out of nothing, whereas premise one appeals to our experience with everything, which implies that something is created or caused to something else. So, no, I don't think the universe was caused in any sense of that word. We literally cannot use that word with any definition that we have. And this is something that Quentin Smith brought up to William Lane Craig, and William Lane Craig's response was effectively, then we just had to change the definition of the word cause, which is, a concession in and of itself. We don't have an idea of what it would be like for the universe to be caused, because every experience we have, every philosophical understanding we have of that word and what that means and the operation that is a referent to, that doesn't apply outside of time or outside of the efficient and material basis. So no, I don't think the universe was caused. I think that's silly.
Next question is for Adam. In your opening statement, you seem to propose a scenario in which this argument was sound. Do you find that, given King's objections as to the non sequiturs that perhaps have presented themselves, that it is still a sound argument? Further, you brought up specifically the topic of whether or not it would be accepted ever. Was this not merely an appeal to emotion to set you up from the start?
Okay, so the question is, I set up an appeal to emotion an appeal to emotion, and then presented an argument that is sound, and the King is saying that it's now unsound, and if I still think that it is sound? Is that the question?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, yes, I do think it is sound, because unlike what my opponent has gestured or consistently posited throughout the debate, I am not equivocating the concept of beginning to exist or causing in any scenario. I've consistently used the same definition for every word, and I don't see where the non sequitur would arise, or equivocation, or anything like that.
Okay. Also for Adam, can you explain whether you believe the universe was created ex nihilo or ex materia, what degree of certainty you have over the universe's creation, and whence the certainty comes from?
And what was that last part?
Where does your certainty come from?
Yeah, so I would argue that the material began to exist, that the universe began to exist ex nihilo, because, namely, my second premise, the universe began to exist. I define universe as all time. And so for that stuff to begin to exist, there would have to be a point before which it did not exist. So therefore, that's like I said before, there was at some point before which none of that existed. Therefore, it would have to be created out of none of those things, no time, space, or matter. However, I could see a scenario which some Christians, I believe, do support, where there is energy that is sitting there for eternity, not really doing anything, but waiting for God to act upon it. I would not hold that view, I would say, but I also would not be necessarily against it. And my degree of certainty that the universe has, or that the universe was created, is very high. But as for whether it was created out of nothing, my degree of certainty is, I guess, up in the air. I mean, I'd still hold to that view, but I wouldn't necessarily say that disagreeing with that view would destroy the Kalam cosmological argument by any stretch of the imagination.
This next question is to both of you. King, if you want to answer first, and if you could keep the answers kind of brief for time reasons. Is energy immaterial or material, and can you give a brief explanation as to why you think that?
Adam, do you want to go first?
I could. What was the first part of that question?
Is energy immaterial or material?
I would say it's immaterial because it's not matter. I would define material as being made of matter, and I think that actually is the definition of material. Now, whether it could exist with or without time, I would say that energy requires time to exist, which is the reason why I believe in creatio ex nihilo. But if someone were to find a way for energy to be beyond time, wouldn't be opposed to it. Yeah. I just don't think it could.
My answer to that is, quote, material from the Cambridge Dictionary, a physical substance that things can be made from. And energy matches that definition. So I would say energy is material.
Next question is for Adam. You say that the first instance in time is when God thought or otherwise willed a creation to occur. Do you then mean to say that these actions do not happen as a result of God's creation, or the dimensions instead, do not happen as a result of God's creation of that dimensions? Instead, it is merely a reflection of His will. I'm not sure I understand that last part myself, so don't be embarrassed if you're a little bit lost.
Okay. Yeah. Could you read the question one more time? I'm having trouble understanding it.
You said that you say that the first instance in time is when God thought or otherwise willed a creation to occur. Do you then mean to say that these actions do not happen as a result of God's creation? Instead, it is merely a reflection of His will.
I see. Okay. So the question is, are these things coming into existence just because God suddenly willed something, or are these things coming into existence specifically because God willed them? And I would opt for the second option. I would say that the first moment in time is God's willing of these particular things. If God had willed something else, then time would not necessarily begun to exist in the same way. I would say now, if God willed something else, I would say that time would still begin to exist, but that the universe is beginning to exist was because God willed it specifically to begin to exist. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. For King, why did you say, quote, God can't create something out of nothing, end quote, if you're presupposing the non-existence of God in your statement? Isn't that contradictory?
First of all, I didn't say that God couldn't create something out of nothing. My argument was that if He does create something out of nothing, He's using a different set of rules than we have access to. And therefore, we can't use the first premise of the Kalam to get there. No, it's not contradictory, because in a debate, and this may be alien to the person asking this question, but in a debate, sometimes you assume the validity of your opponent's argument in order to critique it from the inside.
Okay. For Adam, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that metaphysics justifies something having an efficient cause, but not a material cause. What metaphysics specifically are you referring to?
Well, like I said before, the ex nihilo nihil fit comes. That's a first metaphysical principle that has been used in philosophy since the beginning of philosophy itself. No one has ever really posited that something could begin to exist without an efficient cause, or at least something. My opponents argued that it could begin to exist without it, or that everything we've witnessed has had a material cause, so that the universe, if it began to exist, would all. I don't think that necessarily or logically follows. I just think that some kind of cause, and that some kind of cause would have to be an efficient cause. Otherwise, like I said, you're pulling something out of I'd say out of thin air, but it's even less than thin air.
Can I jump on that? He did that to me a minute ago. I would like to respond.
Briefly, go ahead.
Briefly. Okay, he said that it doesn't follow for us to suggest that because everything we have, that we've observed has a material cause, the universe itself has a material cause. Okay, let's just take the word material out of there. It doesn't follow for us to say that because everything we have observation or experience with has a cause, the universe has a cause.
I'd agree, because our experience is not the only factor in determining
Kalam is
the
a
first.
non sequitur.
What? Okay.
Okay.
I was saying that the first premise is validated by philosophy and then confirmed by science. It's not validated by science.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next question. For King, if the universe just is or it always was, that would mean the past is infinite? Question mark.
Perhaps. I don't think that humans have a strong enough grasp on infinity or eternalism to make a determination.
Okay.
I'll just answer that with I don't know.
Okay. We have a clarification to the earlier question about Adam. The question about result or reflection of the world. The clarification is: did God create dimensions, or did dimensions merely appear as a reflection of the actions that God did that would require a dimension? So I'm guessing he means like first, second, third dimensions to describe like objects or whatever.
Okay, so did he directly create dimensions, or did the dimensions come into being because he created matter, basically? Or space?
I think it's more like, did he create the dimensions themselves, or did the dimensions come into existence because God created something that would require dimensions?
I would say that God directly created the dimensions themselves, and the dimensions is just another way of saying space. I argue that God created space, and I've also argued, not today, but in other times, that time, space, and matter had to come into existence simultaneously, and it also follows from Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens at the beginning is time, the heavens is space, and the earth is matter. And so I would say that God willed specifically space to come into existence.
Okay. Next question is for Adam. Why first cause has to be conscious or mind or thinking substance? Okay, let me reword that a little bit. Why does the first cause have to be conscious instead of a non-physical and non-thinking substance?
Right, okay. Let's see. Give me 1 second. Okay, so a lot of atheists would argue that the first cause does not necessarily have to be personal or thinking. My response is that a personal cause is the only explanation of a temporal effect from an eternal, timeless cause. And to quote William Lane Craig, here's the problem. If a cause is sufficient to produce its effect, then if the cause is there, the effect must also be there. For example, the cause of water's freezing is the temperatures being below 0 degrees Celsius. If the temperature has been below 0 degrees from eternity, then any water around would be frozen from eternity. It would be possible for the water to begin to freeze just a finite time ago. Impossible. It would be impossible for the water to begin to freeze just a finite time ago. Now, the cause of the universe is permanently there, since it is timeless. So why isn't the universe permanently there as well? Why did the universe come into being only 14 billion years ago? Why isn't it as permanent as its cause? Al-Ghazali, who originally formulated the argument in Middle Ages, maintained that the answer to this problem is that the first cause must be a personal being endowed with freedom of the will. His creating the universe is a free act which is independent of any prior determining. So his act of creating can be something spontaneous and new. Freedom of the will enables one to get an effect with a beginning from a permanent, timeless cause. Thus, we are brought to not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator. And to offer another analogy, a table sitting for eternity would not suddenly become a chair or do anything. But a man sitting in a chair could, after an eternity, at any point, sit up or stand up in the chair. So that's one example of how we know the cause is personal. Secondly, as I mentioned before the debate started, there are well-established ontological categories of concrete versus abstract objects and physical versus non-physical objects. An unembodied mind is the only accepted concrete and non-physical object, meaning it has the ability to cause something, but is not physical.
Okay. We received a second clarification to the earlier question. Um, quote, what I mean to say is that he said that time started to exist when God did X, right? But time itself would require inherently the dimension of time to exist, and as such he would be creating a dimension as well. Or merely is it just that the dimension begins to have a beginning point X at such a period? So essentially, did God create time itself, or did him creating also create time?
I see. I think they're. It's really hard to decipher because I think they're both equally true. I think that I would say that time is a compiling of events, and so I would say that with the first, with God's first willing time into existence, or that it was because he willed something that time began to exist. But also, it would be hard to argue that God did not purposely argue or will time into existence, because God is all knowing and knew that as soon as he willed something or decided something, that he would also be creating the existence of time or the time dimension. So I don't really know if I have an either or answer to that question. I would say that they're both equally true.
Okay. Our next question is for King. Why is it a problem for you if God doesn't abide by natural laws? Isn't going against natural laws a necessity for the beginning of the universe?
I'm not referring to natural laws. I'm not saying that it is a problem for me that God doesn't abide by natural laws. The issue is that the Kalam cosmological argument is playing by two different sets of rules, and therefore it's not a sound argument. I granted while talking to Adam that perhaps God could create the universe out of nothing, but if he did that, it's such an operation that we have no ability to comprehend nor deduce. Our understanding of the natural world around us cannot possibly get us to supernatural explanations.
Okay. Next question is also for King. If we start to remove one event at a time, would we reach the first event or not?
I don't know. That assumes a theory of time. I don't know if time is linear, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I'm just going to say I don't know.
Okay. Also for King, does nihilism, which is defined as the belief that nothing in the world has a real existence, is that more sound than the Kalam according to you?
No, I think that's trite. I think they're both nonsense.
Okay. We do have more people typing, but I have reached the end of the channel, so give a few minutes for these last questions to come through.
Right on. I'm seeing some questions that you haven't asked yet.
They might be because I have already heard an answer to them. Like for example, when Depresso Espresso asks you why is creation from no material cosmologically incoherent, you asked that you answered that sort of in the prior question when you were explaining what the view actually was. I mean, am I wrong there? Did you not answer that question?
I don't think I answered it. I don't think I answered that question specifically.
I mean, if you want to go ahead.
I do think that it is logically incoherent for something to be created out of nothing, and I'm willing to justify that. But my point earlier doesn't need to be hinged on that, because I'm willing to grant that something can be caused out of nothing, but that even if we allow that, it's just that we wouldn't be able to logically deduce that. This is not something we can comprehend.
Okay, well,
But I will answer Depresso's question and justify why I think it's logically incoherent.
Yeah, go ahead.
Depresso. So when we are talking about cause and effect, we're talking about, a relationship, and you can't have a relationship with something that doesn't exist. So to cause something to come out of nothing is affecting nothing. It's the same thing as not doing anything at all. It's just silly.
Okay. Another question came through for King. How is it that just because we can't physically comprehend the manner by which God created the universe, then it follows that he doesn't exist?
I never made that argument, nor would any self-respecting intellectual.
Fair enough. So are you guys good to answer unrelated questions, or do you want to stick to the topic?
I'll answer any question that's shot at me, as long as it's not, demeaning.
Yeah, as will I. Yeah.
Okay.
As long as it doesn't damage the integrity of the server, then yeah, I'll answer pretty much any question.
Okay. Adam, this question is for you then. Does God have free will? Given that free will was granted by God, is it something that God himself has, or is it merely a reflection of a will being executed of which perfect knowledge is not known? There is more to that, but I'm going to read through it before I say it. So if you want to go ahead and answer if God has free will.
Okay. I didn't really understand the second part to that question. I would definitely argue that God does have free will. Could you repeat the second part again?
Given that free will was granted by God, is it something that God themselves has, or is it merely a reflection of a will being executed of which perfect knowledge is not known? To say, if God does not have free will, what then distinguishes the God sentient creation from a non-sentient creation, which inherently would it have a concept of a free will?
Okay. Maybe it would help if I saw that question in writing, but
It's in the Q&A questions only chat at the very bottom. It's by Mr. Duck.
okay, let's see if I can find it. Q&A questions only. I would certainly say that God does have free will, and that God has granted us free will. So he's kind of in the same way that God exists and has granted existence onto the rest of reality. Something that he can grant us because he has it himself and it's inherent in his nature. Let's see. I'm going to read the rest of this question.
King, while he's reading that, if you want to answer the next one, can an actual infinite amount of time be traversed according to you?
I suppose so. I mean, if we think about it, numbers are infinite. There's an infinite amount of variable numbers between 1 and 2, but we can still conceptually get from 1 to 2.
So I'm going to leave Q&A open for a few more minutes. Let me go back there and see if there's any good questions that I have missed.
Yeah, I'm having trouble understanding Mr. Duck's question.
I mean, you said he has free will, and most of it seems to be asking if he doesn't. So I think it's
yeah, that's
I think it's
what I've
mostly
gathered
answered.
too. Okay.
Can I try a new answer to Blasty's question?
The infinite amount of time one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Infinite Grim Reaper's paradox, but effectively there's this paradox that's presented called the Infinite Grim Reaper's paradox. And so a guy is supposed to be executed at midnight, and there are an infinite number of Grim Reapers that are going to kill him. So there's a Grim Reaper that's going to kill him at 1:30 if he makes it that far. There's a Grim Reaper that's going to kill him at 1:15, at 1 o'clock, at 12:45, and at literally every single interval between all of time. So like the principal idea is that the guy never gets killed because you can't ever actually get to 12 o'clock, right? There's always going to be some divisible fraction of time before you get to exactly 12 o'clock, and that's going to happen ad infinitum. And so therefore the Grim Reapers never managed to kill him because there's always a prior Grim Reaper to kill him. But intuitively, we would know that if there are an infinite amount of Grim Reapers to kill this guy who's going to be executed, eventually he's going to get killed. And the way that we can solve this problem is just by eliminating the prior Grim Reapers. So a better way to explain it would be to say that, 2 points can exist within an infinite plane and be definitive, even if the plane outside of those 2 points is infinite. So you can have events in an infinite, in like an infinite plane, but they're just constantly recycling, so to speak, which I think is one of the multiverse arguments. But it's not something I'm 100% convinced of, but I think that there are philosophical schools of thought that attempt to explain how anything can happen within an infinite plane.
Okay. Another question for you. Since you find objections to Adam's argument presented here, Do you think there is a more sound, though perhaps not complete, argument for the, I'm gonna guess he means KCA, for the Kalam Cosmological?
I mean, I've heard a lot of objections. Like most objections tend to focus on the second premise because, like I said in my opening, the second premise is neither scientifically nor philosophically conclusive. I would say that there are an equal amount of people on both sides of that argument, whether or not the universe had a beginning, and that boils down to what we mean by begin. The problem is that we are using these sort of Aristotelian terms to try and encompass the whole of, cosmology, which I don't think is adequate. I think we're going to need to come up with some new words, which is a concession that even William Lane Craig makes in his debate with with Quentin Smith. That by the understanding of what we mean when we say something is caused, that couldn't apply to the whole of the universe. And I'm willing to search for that quote. I think I can find it. I think I have it stored away somewhere. But effectively, William Lane Craig concedes that what we mean by the word cause doesn't adequately apply to the origination of the universe, whatever that was.
Okay. How many more questions are you guys interested in answering? Because I don't want to take up all your whole day.
I'm gonna go mow my lawn, but I mean I've got until 9 o'clock before the sun goes down. So I mean I'm available pretty much the entire afternoon. It only takes me like 3 hours to mow.
I've also got some time. I'd probably say I don't want to spend much more than this. I've got my sister's coming to visit, so
I was wondering what you cut out right there.
Sorry, what'd you say?
You said you don't want to spend much more, and then you cut out.
Oh, I don't want to spend much more than 20 minutes on it.
Okay. 20 minutes, so got it. Next question. This is for King. How is an infinite amount of divisions the same as an infinite amount of time?
I used time in my example. Like there are infinite amount of divisions between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, but we still get from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. The way that we perceive time is linear. And as a result, we can artificially assign starting points and stopping points, and it is still utilitarian to us. So, regardless of whether or not time itself is infinite, is beside the point. We're talking about things that we can comprehend, and I don't think infinity is one of those things. So again, I'll just answer I don't know.
Okay. On that topic, there's another question saying that you were explaining potential affinity and not actual infinity, when the question was regarding actual infinity.
Maybe that person is smarter than me, but I don't recognize the distinction too.
Okay. Another question for King. Can you expand on the point about intuition? I feel like people are missing how that adds to a non-secondary of the argument.
Oh, yeah. The first premise of the Kalam is justified by our intuition. Both Adam and Craig made this assertion in their opening. Well, in his opening and his rebuttal, he reinforced it with intuition, with what we understand about the universe. To deny the causal principle is to be blind to the evidence. That's a direct quote from William Lane Craig. But they're metaphysically cherry picking. Our intuition doesn't just tell us that things have causes; it tells us that things have efficient and material causes. And so, if we're to assume that the universe itself doesn't have a material cause, but it does have an efficient cause, or vice versa, for whatever reason, then we're not playing by the same rule. So that's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow to suggest that something adhering to this set of rules can deduce something adhering to a completely different set of rules. That doesn't make any sense. We have to use the same rules if we're going to make a sound deductive argument.
Okay. A question for Adam. You mentioned that you wish you had gotten to the other two parts of the argument. However, does this necessarily matter, as King found, or at the least thinks he has found, an objection which makes the first premise unsound, and thus in a given syllogism it is no longer fully true? Essentially, you wanted to go to the other parts of the argument, but was that really necessary to do?
Yeah, I would agree that if King had found out that the first premise was not true and was unsound, then I would agree that there was second and third premise. But I found his argument against the first premise to be very lacking and unsubstantial, really just speculation at best. And so that's why I was kind of wishing we had gotten to the other two premises, because we were just really talking in circles for the whole discussion section over that one issue. That's why I was disappointed.
Okay.
Can I pop in there real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think the first premise is unsound. I just think that it's not comprehensive. where everything we have experience with is something that begins to exist, or something that is caused to exist, or something that is caused in any capacity, is a two-part relationship. But the second premise is a one-part relationship. And so you can't go from a two-part relationship to a one-part relationship and get a sound conclusion. My issue is not that the first premise isn't sound, but that it doesn't relate to the second.
Okay. There is a clarification for an earlier question. This is referring to question for Adam about the first cause being a mind or non-physical. The clarification is this. When I drop a ball, the ball falls to the ground. We don't say the cause of the ball has a mind, which is gravity. Also, when an electron emits a photon, we don't think this cause of photon emitting has a mind. So the cause of our universe could be non-physical and a non-mental cause. First cause might not have free will. First cause has no other choice but to cause our universe to exist, like the cause of falling of the ball and the cause of emitting of photon.
Yeah, so the problem with these two examples is that the cause and the effect are both temporal. That is to say, they are in time. They're changing, they're affected by time under the restriction of time. Whereas with the beginning of the universe, there was no time to restrict the cause. So therefore, the cause would be beyond time, atemporal, timeless, changeless. The changeless one is the one that really makes sense to me, because when you say something is changeless, how could something not change, but then still cause something else to change? It doesn't make any sense. So, for example, like I read earlier, if water is constantly under 0 degrees Celsius, unchanging, how could it cause ice to form, which is a change? The difference is that only a being endowed with freedom of the will would be able to produce a temporal effect, that is an effect in time, while the cause itself is timeless.
Okay. For King, what are your thoughts on the other two causes that Aristotle also mentions? Do you think those are also necessary, or are just material cause and efficient cause sufficient?
Efficient cause and material cause are the only ones we really need to talk about for the KCA, but the other two causes that Aristotle mentions would be the formal cause and the final cause. The formal cause is whatever form the effect takes. So in the example of the Ford Mustang, the formal cause would be the Ford Mustang. And then the final cause would be why the Ford Mustang was brought into existence. And that is only a necessary postulation if we assume or we know that the efficient cause was an intelligent mind. So yeah, if God created the universe, then it would have an efficient cause. But I apologize. If God created the universe, it would have a final cause. But if the efficient cause of the universe was not a willful or intentional mind, then it wouldn't have a final cause. However, it would have a formal cause, that being that the universe, that is the form of the universe.
Okay. Next question is for Adam. If the universe is quantized, does that refute the analogy about seconds being infinitely divisible?
Okay, so is he's trying to understand the argument? Does that mean that if the universe is made up of a specific, its own time dimension, that it refutes the analogy about seconds being infinitely divisible? Or maybe I should say, if the universe, if time.
You cut out a little bit. But I believe the question is referring to if the
You can
universe.
still hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay, I don't know what happened.
Yeah. I believe the question is referring to if the universe was like quantum sized, right? He's saying quantized, which is applying quantum theory to. So if we apply quantum theory to the universe, does that refute made up of discrete parts? He clarifies. So if the universe is made up of discrete parts, does that refute the analogy about seconds being infinitely divisible?
Sorry, my sister keeps calling me. Give me 1 second. Let me alter.
King, while we're waiting on him, if you want to go ahead and answer the next one.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
So if the universe was made up of discrete parts, so individually countable parts, would that refute the analogy? Okay, so I think there is an argument ongoing over whether or not time has a smallest meaningful increment. So like people say maybe the Planck time, if you're familiar with that, is the smallest meaningful increment of time, but could that even be divided to be even smaller? I don't think you need to refute the argument about seconds being infinitely divisible because that would just be a potential infinity. And to suggest that this potential infinity implies an actual infinity is guilty of a modal operator shift. So, for example, if I say possibly this second is divisible into halves here and here and here, it does not logically follow that the second is divided into places that possibly exist here and here and here. What I'm saying is just because it is possibly divided does not mean that there are possibly infinite number of places in which it is divided into. So there are multiple ways you can go to refute the analogy.
Okay. Next question is for King. Numbers are potentially infinite. We can always add another number to the number series, but it has a setting point. So according to that, even if the events are potentially infinite, we will reach the first event. What do you think about this?
Only it follows, because even if we're going to take the number example, then no, numbers don't actually have a starting point, because like if we assign a starting point, we immediately fail because there's an infinite amount of variables between that starting point and the next sequence. So we would never get to the next sequence by that logic. If we start at 0 and go to 1, there are an infinite number of variables between 0 and 1. And then you also have the concept of negative numbers, which I suppose denote nothing referent, but that's a much more metaphysical conversation that I think that I'm capable of having. So I'm going, again, one more time saying that I don't really know, but I think I can somewhat conceive of finite happenstance within an infinite plane. So 1 + 1 = 2, but there are an infinite number of divisions. And there is no real starting point when we talk about numbers, because like with the Grim Reaper example, there's no point at which the person's actually going to get killed because you never get to the starting point. It's constantly infinitely divisible. There is no starting point if we talk about infinity.
So on that same topic, what about the number 0? Is that not a starting point?
Well, the point is you can't get to 0. That's the issue. You can never actually get to 0 because you can constantly infinitely divide the quantities between 0 and 1, and 0 is referent to nothing, to the absence of anything. So I don't think it would make sense that nothing could be the starting point or that 0 could be the starting point.
If I could interject real quick, I actually have to go, but I really appreciate y'all having me on. I've had a thought-provoking morning the beginning to the afternoon for sure. So I appreciate everything, and I'll be happy to take any questions in text form afterwards.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being here.
Adam, I appreciated that. I appreciated the conversation. Thanks, man.
Agreed. You too.
So I guess on that note, we're just going to go ahead and wrap up the event. Thank you all for coming. If you're watching this on YouTube, as a reminder, if you want to participate in future events, you do have to join the Discord. Again, the link should be in the description. If the audience would like to continue discussing it, I'm about to move everyone into a different VC so you guys can talk about it there. And with that in mind, thank you all for coming once again, and we'll see you at the next event. Ryan, you can go ahead and cut the stream. Your mom.
Hey, look at that. Well, that was fun. I think the stream is still going, guys. Is everybody's server muted? I think everybody's server.
They shouldn't be.
But the
Oh,
stream
sorry.